Hey. Hello, I'm Steve Goad with the OpenSeas Technology Innovation Hub. I'm here with Jerry Cronin, the Executive Director for our next session in the webinar. There you go, Jerry.
Thanks, Steve. Glad to be with everybody again today. I hope you've enjoyed this series so far, or if you're just coming in, watching it from the get-go, that's good too. We're doing this in support of the Department of Energy's SBIR and STTR program. We've had a series of them. Today, we're going to be covering commercialization planning and funding. This is all around this particular opportunity. Keynote date to note here: the phase one submissions are due on the 12th of March, so that's pretty soon now. Okay, so if you're thinking about it, you got to get on the ball and do it. Okay, but this comes out of the SBIR STTR program. As we like to say, this is America's seed fund. This is how we get stuff up and going in the country. Okay, the agenda for today, as always, we'll start off with why this is important in the first place. Then we're going to get into the types of planning you really need to do to increase the probability of success that your innovation, the thing you're doing the research around, will see the light of day, that you'll finish and you'll actually be able to turn it into some sort of sustainable, ongoing operation that can provide goodness to the planning. And you see the three areas we'll talk to there: operational planning, financial planning, but also funding planning. We'll talk a little bit about the funding spectrum. This is usually a topic near and dear to people's heart. That's why you're applying for an SBIR, STTR. Then we'll talk about various funding sources. And as always, at the end of our presentations, in our slide decks, we always put some links out to some resources and assistance that are available to folks who are pursuing these sorts of things. Again, you've seen this slide before if you've been on this channel. Why is this important? This is important because under the SBIR program and the STTR program, or even outside of that, the various challenges being put together by DOE, there's an increased focus on making sure that more of what's done ends up going out into the real world and providing the value that the government's underwriting the technologies the government is underwriting the development of. So one of our favorite rants, and Steve will corroborate this, is you need to work commercialization into the project from the very start. And by doing that, you're going to up your probability of being selected for the project in the first place. And in my mind, even more importantly, if what you're doing is really good and important for the world, it increases the probability of successfully launching your solution into both the government and the commercial markets. And these types of programs, SBIRs, STTRs, and challenges help you do that. Okay. Now, why is commercialization planning important? In big, bold letters, tech is not a solution. Okay. Tech is something that needs to be embedded within processes and all sorts of other things to deliver value. Okay. And then it's got to get out into the world to actually provide value to the world. So it doesn't stop at proving that your tech works, or even doing customer discovery and creating some sort of validated value proposition and business model. It doesn't stop there. You need to execute, and execution requires planning. If you don't do it, you won't see the light of day. Okay. Why is funding planning important? I'm sure everybody knows this deep down in their heart. You need to have funds to get to the point where you have paying customers, number one. And number two, you need funds and revenues to operate and to grow. So there's that challenge of, okay, how do I get my minimum product? How do I prove my tech? How do I do all that stuff before I even have somebody who's willing to be a pilot case or even be a paying customer? There's expenses there, and you need to cover them somehow. And that's a good thing for SBIRs, STTRs, various grants and things along those lines enable, and they're one of the sources that help you do that. But after that, you need ongoing funds to both operate the business, i.e. create the value that you're delivering out to the marketplace, and to grow. With no additional funding, you've got no way of paying for the additional research that's going to go from your version 1.0 to your version 2.0 to your version 3.0. It all takes funding. So let's talk types of planning. If you've been on this channel before, again, you've seen kind of our overview of what we call the business opportunity development process that we coach folks through. And as I said before, we didn't invent this. We stand on the shoulders of giants like Osterwilder and Reese and Steve Blank and all those guys, okay? So first phase, you've assessed your opportunity, you've done customer discovery to validate that you bring something of value to the market, you've created a business model, which you've validated to prove that there's a high likelihood that I could actually deliver all this. What we're talking about here is phase two, okay? Once you have that business model and that value proposition, that's what you're marching to. That's what you're aiming for, standing up and delivering to the marketplace. So you've got to do business opportunity planning now. And that's in three areas. What's your plan for getting it up and going? The second thing is you're planning about your financial needs, both what kind of revenues might come in and also what it's going to take you to run your organization, okay? And with those numbers in hand, you now say to yourself, okay, how much money am I going to need to get from outside my own pocket or outside my own company's, willingness to spend to go out and get this stuff? So you need to plan that. You need to plan where your funding is going to come from, and that's going to change over time, and also do some planning on who you're going to reach out to and what sort of pitch you need to give to those people. So let's talk operational planning. And this is kind of a 101, but 101 is important. In the companies we consult with, I find many of them don't kind of see things in this particular way, or they're doing what would be minimal planning, where they need to do more. So at the business model canvas level, you need to plan out your key activities at a minimum. Ideally, you add in other necessary activities to make sure that they are planned and done. Okay, so you got your key ones, and then you have the other ones you got to put some task lists and ticks against. And then consider that business model canvas you've developed is not a plan. What it is, it's a model. It's a way of you being able to explain to somebody what your business is, what value it delivers, how you're going to create that value, and how the revenue, the math all works. Okay, it's a high-level view of the value proposition, and it's a high-level view of the business model to deliver that proposition. It's not a plan. So let's talk project management 101. And I get this from places like the Program Management Institute. Highly recommend it. They've got a whole bunch of pretty good stuff on how to put projects together. They have certifications available. If you're doing work in the federal space, you might have seen things about project management professional certifications and things like that. These are the things they talk about. The first one is the triple constraint. When you're doing a plan from a business standpoint, the three things you got to think about your planning is scope, schedule, and cost. Scope is what you're doing. Schedule is the time frame you're doing it to. And cost is the resources it's going to take, whether it be people, money, infrastructure, raw materials, the costs associated with those things in order to accomplish the different elements of scope. And those are the three parts. And just kind of a little add in there, if you're ever managing a contract with a client or the government or somebody along those lines, you always want to have this in mind. If you bid a certain price and they come to you and say, hey, we want you to make some changes here, okay, your response should be, okay, scope's changing. It's going to affect the other two. Same thing works. If schedule changes, if they want it a lot sooner, it might affect the scope, how much you can do, what you can do, and have an impact on costs. So by always having the triple constraint in mind, you can talk to your client or maybe even your design engineers and say, hang on a second, if you're changing what we're doing, what's the impact on our schedule and our cost? So those are the triple constraints. Project planning breaks down into, basically 5 key areas. What are the tasks you need to do? What are those main elements that I need to, at a high level, I need to I need to develop the power supply that's going to power my unmanned vehicle. That's a mainline task. Okay, it's got something that you can see at the end that you come out with. It's a big bucket, right? The activities are the things you need to do to accomplish that task. Okay, then you want to look at dependencies. There's certain tasks and activities you can't do until you've done others. All right. And that's why that's important, is it affects schedule. I can't do those things at the same time necessarily if they're dependent on each other. I just can't throw more people at the problem because I have to wait till one's done till I can do the next one. Affects your schedule. Okay. Resources, what does it take to do that task? And the schedule being the length of time it takes to do that task. All right. So when you're breaking down for your SBIR or your challenge, or they're asking what your plan is, these are the types of things you look at. These are the things you look at to develop that schedule that they're asking for, that plan they're asking for. By using these types of terms, you're kind of showing you know what you're talking about. Okay, so an example. Okay, baking a cake. Everybody likes cakes, or at least I like cakes, right? Okay. I'm gonna make a homemade dessert cake. Okay, what are my main elements? Okay, got to select a recipe. Do I want chocolate cheesecake? Do I want angel food? Whatever. Okay. Based upon that, I need to obtain the ingredients. So obviously there's a dependency there, right? I need to prep the ingredients. I need to prepare the oven. I need to bake it, and then I need to serve. So you can consider those kind of like high-level tasks there. And then to the right of those, you see some activities that would go into those tasks. So, for example, obtaining ingredients. I have to get the ingredients for my recipe. First thing I'm going to go to is I'm going to check my pantry. Do I have the flour? Do I have the sugar? Do I have the orange zest or the oranges I can make zest from? That kind of stuff. I check my inventory. I check my pantry. I make a list, and I go to the grocery store for whatever's missing. Right? Same thing with preparing the oven, right? Okay. First of all, I check that the oven's empty. Sometimes things are stored in ovens. Then I preheat the oven. So I think you get the idea here. The top level ones are tasks, and then you break down the activities underneath those tasks to identify what needs to be done. How far you go into identifying those activities really depends on the complexity of the task and how much information you need to have to make sure that whoever's doing the task does it the way you want, and also to make sure you consider the work that needs to be done so you can figure out the resources properly for the timing and the scheduling. So here's an example of a Gantt chart where I've labeled the dependencies. All right. So first thing I do is I go and I select the recipe. All right. Then I can obtain ingredients and I can prepare the oven. I can't prepare the oven prior to knowing what temperature I need it to be at, right? So there's only the preparing the oven and obtaining the ingredients are both dependent upon me having a recipe. So you see the way those things split out. All right. After I've obtained the ingredients, I can prepare the ingredients. That doesn't affect preparing the oven. Once I prep the ingredients and I've prepped the oven, those two things need to have happen in order to bake the cake. So baking a cake is dependent upon I've prepped my ingredients and I've prepared my oven. I can now do it. Once I finish baking that cake, I can now serve my cake. So you see what I've done is I've gone and I've added up the timings on all this stuff. For selecting a recipe, I'll take 10 minutes to do it. I like reading cookbooks. I'll give myself an hour and a half for the ingredients. I might have it all on hand, but just in case, I might have to make a quick run to the store. Overall, the max that's going to take is an hour and 33 minutes, so on and so forth. So when I'm trying to figure out the total time, what I do is I look at what path I would take through this graph, through this diagram. What's the maximum time it takes for me to get from the left-hand side all the way to the right-hand side? So what this lets you do by thinking about it this way is you can ask some questions along the lines of slack. What slack is things like preparing the oven, okay? The line for preparing the oven, it only takes me 5 minutes to prepare that oven, to get it up to 350 or whatever it's baking at, right? Max of 5 minutes. The other path will take me an hour and 47 minutes, which means that in the task of preparing the oven, I don't need to start that right away. I just need to start that at some point within that hour and 47 minutes, and I'm fine. So that preparing the oven task has a lot of slack in it. Okay, I can play with that. You do this when you're balancing resources between different projects. I don't need to take this person off that project right now to move them to do this task because they still have some time to wait on that task. Okay. The other thing it tells you is, where are my real opportunities to cut time? So if I say I want to cut time out of this, so I'm going to find an oven that heats faster. Well, guess what? That will not affect your time whatsoever. All right. Okay. The places that I can really impact and cut time out of this is if I'm able to obtain ingredients faster, right? And in the manufacturing world, that might be parts inventory on hand. If I have a certain amount of parts in inventory and I make sure I keep enough to produce X number of units, then I can cut the time it takes for ordering and delivering of parts to fulfill various delivery requirements. So that would be a way to cut time. In preparing ingredients, there's plenty of recipes where you can make parts of it from scratch, or you can buy a pre-made cake mix, right? Maybe instead of buying all the ingredients separately, I get a Betty Crocker cake mix that all I need is some milk and a couple of eggs. Okay, that would be a place of cutting time. So if they came to me and said, hey, we can't wait for 2 hours and 5 minutes for this to happen, we got to figure out how to cut it, those are the places I would look. And then the last thing you look for is, are there opportunities to multitask? Okay, so maybe in this one, okay, I've got certain ingredients I got to go to the store for, but some of the other ingredients can be prepped ahead of time. Okay, while I'm going to the store, I can do some prepping on the ingredients I already have in hand. That would be an opportunity to multitask and perhaps cut a little bit of time out of that area. Multitasking is always, I don't need to wait until I prep the ingredients to prepare the oven. Preparing the oven is something I can do while I'm doing something else, multitasking. So just a way of looking at stuff. A way you commonly see this laid out, and a way I've laid out in proposals and plans and things like that, is a thing called work breakdown structure. Okay. And if you see there, each of the top level things, the overall top level thing is breakdown structure 1.0, right? Then underneath that, I have the major tasks is 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, laying it out, right? Underneath that, you see 1.2.1, 1.2.2. I can further break down my activities. Okay. My next column over, I can capture what my dependencies are. And then what I do is I build a little table saying, what is my personnel resource to get that done? So in this case, I need 5 minutes of a person to do certain things. I need 2 minutes to make a grocery list. I need 1 hour for that person to go and go to that grocery. That's how I derive my overall time for that task. And then in the far right-hand column, you see other resources needed. So I list, other than people, what do I need? I need an oven. I need money. I need my car to go out and do something. To make a grocery list, old school, I have paper here. Most of the time, I just put it in my notes app on my phone, right? But you identify those things going down. As part of a charity thing I've done, I've chef dinners before, hence I really like food. Laying out things like this for a big event is really, really critical and allows you to plan your work. Same thing applies to whatever technology you're taking to the marketplace. So let's talk about some considerations for a startup in your planning, okay? MVP, remember that's a minimal viable product. That's the first thing you're taking out to the marketplace that can go to some customer who's going to use it and give you feedback. It's the smallest amount of features that you can get out there that provide value to them and they're willing to work with. It's not every single feature you'll ever have. So, is your MVP ready to go at the point you are? If not, you need to plan on how that's developed, because that's going to take time, it's going to take resources, it's going to take money. Also, prior to getting revenue, you're going to have to plan out, okay, what kind of marketing and sales stuff do I need to do? Okay, and this gets kind of back to the whole team thing we've talked about in the past. To make something successful, it's just not really the technical wizard guy in there. You need a marketing wizard. You need somebody who can go out and build your sales and do things like that. Sometimes you do, you wear multiple hats in these type evolutions. But if you're not going to do it all yourself, what's that going to cost you? Is your business infrastructure in place? How are you going to establish it? And the examples I have here, I almost call it the blocking and tackling of business, right? You've got your tech. Everybody loves your tech. You got your solution, yay, rah, rah. How's it going to be delivered? What's the support look like? That whole back office thing. Do I have an accounting system? How am I going to track this stuff? I'm getting a contract with the government. They expect certain reporting. All that is infrastructure, business infrastructure you have to have in order to carry out what you're doing. And these startup items usually represent what you call sunk pre-revenue costs. They're the things you need to do to begin the business prior to any money coming in, revenue from sales or profits or any of those sorts of things, okay? You have to identify those. And then the other thing from a planning standpoint is, okay, ongoing operations. What are my fixed operational tasks and activities? Once I'm going, I need to do marketing and outreach. I need to do licenses. I need that whole back accounting thing. That doesn't go away once I launch my product. In fact, it's going to keep going. So those are fixed costs. Those are the costs that you're going to incur regardless of whether you sell 0 items or 2 million items. You've got certain costs you've got to cover, okay? Then the next question you're asking is, what are my variable costs, which are variable tasks and activities? So for every one of your units you sell, you have a cost per unit sold, or cost per goods sold, or cost per solution sold. So that usually breaks down into, I've got to manufacture whatever it is. Say I'm doing a device for producing energy. I've got to manufacture those devices. Those devices just don't magically go out into the water or go magically out into the countryside where they're going to, do stuff with the solar energy or the maritime energy or something like that. There's some sort of implementation that'll need to be done. And the units might be different when you're doing your calculations, when you're trying to model this all out. For example, it might cost X number of dollars for you to do the implementation for each company you do, just the stand-up costs, all right? The going in and maybe adjusting their databases or working with them to change their business processes to accommodate what you're doing. And then maybe there's an ongoing cost of, for every employee they get in there, I've got to add somebody else to the system. There's some kind of scaling factor where I have a cost. Maybe I'm buying a license that is used as part of my solution, and that license is on a per seat basis. That needs to be worked into my planning. And then the cost of customer acquisition. How much is it going to cost me to go out and find folks? And how much is it going to cost me to support customers once I have them? So those are the considerations. Then there are scale-up considerations in your planning, okay? Now, the good thing is, in an early stage SBIR, early stage challenges, you don't have to go hardcore into the scale-up considerations, but you might be asked some questions of how this thing's going to scale, how this thing's going to grow up. So you need to be thinking about it, but the level of detail is not as strong at the beginning as it will become later on. But you need to consider it because it might influence your planning on how you start the thing up, right? So what are your plans for increasing the size of your business? Okay, I'm going to need additional marketing. I might need additional fundraising if I'm not generating enough profits from the business to do my own scaling and growing. More staff. I might need to increase my infrastructure, maybe buy some more machinery or machine tools or something like that. that sort of thing. I need to move into a larger building. And then the plan for extending beyond your beachhead market. That place you win with your MVP, all well and good, okay? But that's not where you stop. You want to capture beyond that. When you were doing your customer segmentation and thinking of all the different places your solution would work, you selected one for a beachhead, but now you're going to start going after others as you scale up. The second item is planning for innovation. In companies, a lot of times you call this internal research and development. These are the things, this is the money you need to generate and the plans you need to do for improving your product. Okay, so you've got a product, you've got a solution, you've got a standard version you can deliver out there on a repeatable basis. That's great. Okay. One of your side activities is you're listening to all the things your customers are saying about what they like, what they don't like, maybe what else would be good and useful for them. You're taking all that data, and that's what you're going to feed to your research and development guys, your techie guys who really like inventing stuff, right? And that's your innovation. That's your internal research and development. What you don't want to do is take that and always be putting it into your product on a continuous basis all the time, because then you never have a repeatable solution you can sell. At some point, you need to manufacture something or make something that's standard. And then you control your growth, you control your versions as you go forward. And the other part you need to consider and scale up is fundraising activities. Okay, how are you going to handle the finances? Do I need to go after another round of investment funding if I went after investment funding to help me expand my market? A lot of times later on, investing is more about not so much developing the technology as to really blowing out what you're doing in the marketing area. So you might be doing fundraising activities there. Or there's even activities around your bank, managing lines of credits, establishing banking relations with the folks who are going to enable you to manage the ebbs and flows of your cash flow coming into the business. So those are scale-up considerations. But if you're early stage, these are just have them in the back of your mind, but you're not going really hardcore on it. So now, let's talk about financial planning. Okay. Financial planning, it's really all about revenues and costs. And you see now and in the future. So I've got my current state, okay, but I also have to be thinking forward into my future state, because it all affects the long-term viability of the company or your solution going out to market. And frankly, whether it's worthwhile you spending your time doing it. Okay, what's this thing going to look like? Okay, we hit this pretty strongly before. All those plans we talked about, all those plans have costs associated with them. And you see those items here. Okay, and these happen before you produce revenue. So you've got no money coming in, you've got no profits, but you got costs. Same thing with the operational costing. After you start revenue production, now you're trying to make sure that the money coming in covers these fixed costs and those incremental costs of delivery. We hit this in an earlier session, but again, just to refresh your mind, you've got your internal stuff, which is, okay, this is what it's going to cost me, and this kind of, all that other kind of bit. The other half of your equation is, remember, the revenue side. And we talked about this last week. Way to look at it, you have a total addressable market, which is the entire universe of potential customers. That is not what you do your calculations against. All right, that's a start. Okay, then you ask yourself, how much of that universe are you going to reach within your sales and delivery channels? That's your serviceable addressable market. And then there's your target market, which would be out of that universe, and out of that part of the universe you can reach, what's the likelihood that people are going to buy? And you're only converting part of that target market. So if you're prepping some stuff for a pitch or anything like that, what you want to avoid is taking the total addressable market and saying that's what it's worth. I hear that a lot in like unmanned aerial vehicles. Everybody will say, oh, it's a $200 billion industry or whatever. And what they're talking about is the entire industry. And if these guys are say, a small drone platform, that's actually a very tiny part of that industry. So you can't use the 2 billion, 1 trillion, whatever the big number. It sounds good, but you really need to show some savvy by saying, of that part of the market, here's the part that we're addressing, and here's how many of these folks we think we can bring over to our team, and at what pace. Okay. You also want to look at revenue models. There's multiple models. These are just some of them. But when you're building your financial projections, you got to think about, okay, how do I model the revenue coming in? All right. There's transactional, which means, okay, I am going to hand you something and you're going to give me money for that something. Deal done, deal over. Okay. There's something along the lines of subscription models. Think software a lot of times. I provide you something and you're going to use it. You don't own it. But what you're going to do is you're going to pay me a monthly, a yearly, a daily, whatever type subscription. See that a lot in software, but you also see it in places like jet engines, General Electric. Jet engines, most of the time, they're not selling engines. What they're selling is hours on engines. So it's a service model, right? They give you a thing, Boeing installs it on the plane, and then the airlines that are running these things are paying GM on a per hour basis for there. Knowing what your model is important. And then some of your stuff, you might be saying, our eventual goal here is we want to end up licensing this thing, where instead of us being the producer and the creator of the value and the delivery and all that other kind of stuff, we're going to license it out to some folks who are going to take it, make it part of what they're doing, incorporate it into what they're doing, and take it out into the world. That's valid too. But knowing which one you're using, which you've defined in your business model canvas, then enables you to make some projections. Projecting revenue. What's the revenue model? What units does it scale by? What do you think is a reasonable rate that your sales are going to increase? All right, I sell a software package. It's priced by the seat. Plus, I have an implementation consulting fee at the company level. I also consult with companies on policies related to what they're using software for, and that consulting is priced by the engagement. Okay, those are basically the revenue model plus the scaling. Okay, so I like spreadsheets. Spreadsheets are good things. So here's an example of a spreadsheet that I've used in the past to help me figure out some cash flows and figure out what the flow in the business is going to be. Okay, so I've noticed up top, I've got 2 lines of business that I'm talking about here. All right, ignore the fixed costs down at the bottom. Basically, I'm talking the revenue side. I have a business line of consulting and a business line of ongoing software licenses. And I modeled this out by the month. And you'll notice in this one, with the business line of consulting stuff, I don't have us doing any of that because this is sort of a standard template I use. But if I knew what my consulting was and I knew what the revenue per engagement is, I can figure out for every time I do a consulting gig, every time I bring on a company, here's what the revenue is going to be. And I'm able to project it on a monthly basis. The ongoing software licenses you see down at the bottom. Okay. And I've worked it out that every time I bring on a new company, and I have an average number of seats per company, and there's a total revenue per seat. All right. I can figure out what my gross margin is going to be, because I also put the cost of goods within that thing. So what I'm figuring out is I'm kind of figuring out my gross margin. All right. And I can tack this by month, by month, by month, by month. Okay. So I sum up for all sales lines, for all revenue. I can tell you what my total revenue is per month, my total cost of goods sold for that, and that gives me my gross margin. Okay. But those aren't my only costs. Okay. Now I have fixed costs, and you see some of these listed out here. This is an early stage company. So you'll notice up at the top under the labor category, owner. Okay. When you're going to investors and you're going to other folks, they want to see that you're paying yourself. Now, if you're early stage and you're looking for a whole bunch of money, they don't want to see a $300 million salary or 200K salary or any of that other kind of stuff. But there is an expectation that your business ought to support paying you a little bit. So working that stuff in. A place for in-house sales staff. You notice this company has none. Some upper level support, so it's running pretty lean. Okay. Marketing and sales support. I put in expenses for shows, for travels, because that's the main marketing thing. So I'm able to add that up. And then you have what are called indirect costs, which is my rent, my utilities, my insurance, my professional services, and then other. So I can add all those things up. I've had my revenue side, so I know what's coming in. I have my cost side, so I know what's going out. And I'm able to figure out on a month-by-month basis, am I making money or am I going in the hole? All right. So you see down at the very bottom of that thing, you have something called accumulating operating surplus or a deficit. All right. I put in a column there for startup costs. Cost me 100K to get this thing up and going. And then month by month, it shows for the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 months, I'm not making any money. I'm not bringing in any. I'm still in the hole, right? It's only in month 6 that I start digging out of that, or where I start that I'm actually out of the hole. So for financial requirements, this is modeling your cash flow. All right. By modeling your cash flow, you determine how far, how deep in the hole you're going to go to get this whole thing up and going. You adjust what you can to kind of shrink the size of that. And the end result is what you need to go out and find from someplace or another. So modeling it's going to tell you what it's going to take to up and going. If you don't do this, you keep on going, you keep on going, you keep on going, you might find out you're never able to dig out of the hole. Have a model, have a plan, have a way of looking at it. And here's just, for the graphically minded among us, I've got that blue line. The light blue line is revenues, and that revenues really don't start until month number 2, and it's kind of a little growth. I've got costs. Costs are pretty fixed, right? And then I've got an operating surplus and an operating deficit. That's that green line right there. Okay, so the one that's really kind of critical is the big swoopy blue line, dark blue line. Okay, so if you look, the very bottom of that, the furthest I go down into the hole, okay, is the minimum amount of capital I need to go out and find from someplace. Okay, and I only start coming out of that hole when I'm starting to make revenue. And when I reach the break-even point where I have enough revenue coming in to cover my costs. I still haven't paid this cost of starting this whole thing up. But now I'm now making money every month that I can start applying against that deficit. Okay. Then you see the second line there, the break-even of investment. All right. Break-even of investment is when the profits I've brought in have now filled in the hole that I had to get this whole thing up and going. That happens later after the break-even for operations. Operations is now I'm cash positive as far as operating cash. Break-even is I'm now getting into positive territory with my overall account with how much money I had on board, right? So the key questions you're asking yourself in doing this exercise is, hey, can I make money? Okay. How much do I need to get it going? I like the one, is it worth my time? And part of that's how well you're able to produce, but part of that's also your market size and your revenue projections. And the last one is, okay, it might be worth your time to you, but if you're going out or looking for investment, is it worth your time or somebody, is it worth your money or somebody else's money? So if you look at something and you're saying, man, I'm going to put 200K into this thing and I'm going to make 1% off that 200K going out into the future, might not be your best investment. Okay. If you're going to a bank as part of for a loan to get the thing up and going, say you go through an SBA loan to get your operation going, Okay, they're going to look at that kind of stuff and say, if there's any hiccups, this is going to be problematic. If you go to a venture investor, they're looking for far more than a 1% return on investment. Those guys are looking for like a 10 to 30 times what they put into you before they'll invest. So doing these models, doing this financial planning enables you to have those discussions and make some pretty critical business decisions. Now, let's get to the topic that everybody loves, funding. There's your questions. We talked about how deep in the hole do you go before you start pulling out, right? That's how much you need to get it going. Funding question is where it'll come from and what do you need to obtain that funding? And as always, I'm a fan of planning. Plan this, model this, have a vision supported by some numbers and some hard facts, and it will help you. It'll help the people you're trying to get on board with you. It'll help the people you're trying to get invested in you. This is from a venture capital standpoint. Let me point out this doesn't apply to, say, bootstrapping, but the startup financing cycle from a venture capital standpoint looks like this, right? And if you think of that orange as being profit, and that kind of curve sort of matches the curve I had in my graph earlier, right? Okay, so you got a bunch of co-founders. Then you're into looking at things like accelerators and seed capital and angels. What FFF is friends, fools, and family. Friends, family, and fools. Your friends who will give you money, okay? Early crowdsourcing and crowd lending, okay? What you're trying to do is you're trying to find enough area to get you to the break-even point. Prior to being in the break-even point, you're in the valley of death, which means if you run out of money, if you have a hiccup or something, it can be very dangerous to your operation, might even kill your idea. Then after that, what you see is when you get into the venture capital or strategic capital or acquisitions and mergers, people talk about funding rounds, plenty of information out there on it, but it matches. This is what VCs typically look like. And honestly, what they're looking for is either sort of some public offering or some sort of acquisition or something along those lines. Because remember, venture capital folks want a pretty good multiplier on what they invest in you. So let's talk types of funding. Two major types. You'll hear the words dilutive and non-dilutive. Okay, what dilutive capital is somebody gives you money and you give them part of the company. Okay, so you might have your Uncle John or your Aunt Mary or whatever who say, hey, I'll give you X number of dollars, and you say, well, I'll give you 5% of the company or 10% of the company or something along those lines. You're giving up part, okay? Venture, and in venture, I also include angels because they behave typically the same way. They're also looking for ownership, and strategic guys are also looking for ownership. Let me talk a little bit about this here. The difference between venture and strategic. Okay, a lot of folks think about, oh, we're going to go out to Sand Hill Road or Silicon Valley or whatever. We're going to get an investment from these folks, venture capitalists, and then we're going to have an exit at some point in time. They're looking for pretty significant returns on their dollar. Okay, what a strategic investor is somebody who's not. They still want a return on investment, but really they're investing in you because your technology, your solution is synergistic and adds value to what they're doing. We've done work with a large plumbing and water supply type organization, and they run a venture arm. And what they look for one of the things they look for in that venture arm is investing in companies who do things that help contractors deliver better or help utilities deliver better. Although it's not a product that strategic investing company sells, what it does is it makes their buyers healthier so that they then hopefully buy more and engage more with that overall company we're working for. That's a strategic investor. So sometimes strategic investors look for things that are synergistic to what they're doing. And in the case back when I worked for Fortune 150 at one point in time, we did investing in companies that we viewed as potential for future acquisition. So going after a large contract, we needed particular capabilities. We went and invested in a small company that had unique things for those capabilities, with the idea that, hey, it'll help the contract we're going after, but at some point in the future, we might want to just buy them out in an acquisition, which also gives a nice exit for the founder of the company or the founders of the companies. Okay. Now, the other type of funding, which if you're looking at SBIRs and STTRs or these challenges, is non-dilutive funding. And this is pretty good stuff. This is where you're retaining your ownership. Okay, you're not giving any of the company away to do this. Okay, the places this comes out of, self. Okay, out of your own cash flow or reserves. So if you've got a bunch of money stashed away and say, hey, I got an idea and I've got enough to at least get it going and see if there's traction there, that's what folks are doing. They're taking it out of their own pocket, especially early on, when you haven't proven there's a there yet, you haven't validated the market, you haven't done any of that sort of flow. If you're a business, you might take it out of your profits from other lines of business you have. And we talked earlier about internal research and development, right? If I've got a business that has a couple of lines, product lines or a couple of service lines, and I'm looking at a new one, okay, my options for that are I can go outside and seek funding, which might cost me something, but have some advantages like mitigating the amount of money I need to spend. Or maybe I decide, hey, I'm going to fund it internally, at least for now, to see if we can get it up and going. And then I might consider going out for other sources. So that'd be non-dilutive. Another source of non-dilutive funding, loans, either personal loans or business loans. A lot of companies get started this way. I know folks who, spun off companies and put their houses on the line. Founders all put their houses on the line to get it up and going. That happens. Okay. Now keep in mind, the bank really doesn't want your house. So you're going to have to show them all this good information that, convinces them that, yeah, this is viable. Small Business Administration has loans for startups too. So there's sources of those things out there that you can get for either yourself or sometimes you can get it for the business. Non-dilutive funding. Say you've got traction and now you want to increase your marketing. You've got pretty good profits in. You go and you talk to the bank and say, hey, this is what we want to do. An oftentimes overlooked source of funding, your clients. You could do things like pre-sales, or you can offer things like a discount for basically funding it prior to it being deployed to their particular area, sort of a prepay. Arguments you'd make or cases you'd make to those guys would be, hey, we're going to give you a discount, which is always good. But also, because you're one of our favorite clients, we're going to look at really helping tune this solution so it meets your needs better. I've been in places where we use this technique. We had software which was dealing with certain types of operations on ships, which were very specific to the exact engineering specs of the ship, right? Piping and all that other kind of stuff. So when a fleet came in with a new type of ship we didn't have a model for, what we typically do is we'd strike them a deal. We'd get them to prepay for all that other kind of stuff. We'd build the model, and then for a length of time, they would be paid back off of the particular sales that were happening until finally that was resolved. It worked out for both of us. We got to put new models into our library. Worked out for them because they were able to now train their people very specifically to their vessels, which had impacts on safety and all those other kind of stuff. And the last one, and again, you're here, grants are typically great non-dilutive funding. Things like SBIRs, which is how this whole thing kicked off. That's non-dilutive funding to help you get up and going. Okay, they're not coming back and asking for part of your company. And even better, if you're successful and you're meeting the need of the agency that's released that SBIR, you're kind of growing your own customer for when you're finished. So you get SBIRs, and then you have other grants along the lines of, broad agency announcements. You also have things like competitions. The Department of Energy, through the American Made Network and American Made Challenges, runs a bunch of these against really tough technical problems out there, okay? Those are competitions. Those are sources of funding. And think of funding as a smorgasbord, all right? Your plate's going to end up with more than one type. And what you have on your plate is going to change as you progress through the meal. So early on, you're probably looking at self-funding, grants, and other sources until you prove enough traction for loans or investment capital. Think about it. You've got a wild idea, okay? You really got to find out, talking to people, whether or not it solves an important need folks have that they're willing to pay for, all right? You don't know that yet. So if you just show up and say, hey, I have this idea, give me money, your funders are going to look at you and go, come back in a little bit once you've kind of proven these certain things. You know, the days people talked about in the past out in Silicon Valley where somebody could write something on the back of an envelope or a napkin and all of a sudden get funded. Now, it's gotten a lot savvier than that. Funders do what they call due diligence, which is checking out what you're doing. And part of that due diligence is, are you solving a market need? Is the market big enough? Do you have the team to deliver? Those sorts of things. So while you're developing and finding out those things, grants, self-funding, and other sources until you prove enough traction. And sometimes you got to pivot your business model to match what funding you have available. If you can avoid getting dilutive funding, if you can figure out a way of bootstrapping things, if you can grow company out of your revenue stream and your profits, that's a really, really good thing. Because remember, a venture capitalist is going to want to retrieve a whole lot of money back from you for their investment. They're going to want to do that within 5-10 years or so, is what those guys typically talk about. All right. So, or they might not be interested in your technology. It might be too different for them. Okay. So you say to yourself, okay, I'm not going to get the $3 million that I thought I needed to get this whole thing up and going. Can I do this differently? Can I come out with not only a minimal viable product, but sort of a minimal viable business model, so to speak, that matches what funding is available and I know I can get? Maybe my time frame stretches out a little bit longer. Maybe the first product or solution I have changes a little bit, all to fit within what I can get monetary wise. Otherwise, what occurs is you spend out the money you have and you've got that valley of death that you can't overcome because you now have not achieved either market traction or profits. So, always a pleasure. You know, OpenSeas is here to work with innovators and entrepreneurs. It's here to work with organizations. We like this stuff. Our favorite rant is really, I love technology, but the commercialization's got to be built in from the beginning. And the reasons for that is it ups the probability that after you finish all your research and your prototype and all that, you end up with a sustainable, viable business that's going to provide value into the world. As always, assistance and resources. We've got some things related to this particular DOE opportunity, which is their SBIR release number 2, closing pretty shortly, 12th of March. And last page is, a links to some of my favorite folks out there: Osterwilder, Reese, Lean Startup, Business Model Canvas, Customer Discovery, and a really great set of YouTube videos around building business models. And my contact information is down at the bottom. Have a great day.